the anticipated lightweight title showdown, the undisputed lightweight title, the one where everybody's going to stop arguing about who really is the champion, is finally upon us. George Kambosos against Devin Haney. Very, very evenly matched fight. I think this one really can't miss as far as entertainment value is concerned. You have your typical stylistic matchup where you have a banger against a solid, slick boxer. So you've got your clash of styles. You've got your clash of personalities as one guy is American and one guy is from Australia. You've got a little bit of competitive natured beef going on with, of course, who is the champion. Does Devin Haney's WBC lightweight title really count, or does the franchise title that Kambosos took from Teofimo Lopez count as the premier version of the WBC title? Personally, I wish the WBC would have just saved everybody the trouble and enforced one way or another the mandatory with Lomachenko and Haney. Although, like I said, I think at that time they were allowing Lomachenko to chase the undisputed title against Teofimo Lopez. So they sort of created a double negative, really, because you ended up creating two WBC titles, and both sides believed they had the real version of it. So it's kind of a shame that had to happen. But nonetheless, we have a quick fix coming up right upon us. George Kambosos ends up beating Teofimo Lopez, the winner of the Lopez versus Lomachenko fight, and Kambosos ends up beating him. And now Devin Haney is going to fight George Kambosos, and this will be for all the marbles. This is for the legit undisputed lightweight title, the one where you can't argue for anymore, So let's break down the matchup. First of all, like I said, I think it's an evenly matched fight. I think Haney's the more talented guy. He's got more athleticism. He's very fast. He's the slickster, smooth boxer. Kambosos, to me, is the guy who's a bit more battle-tested. He's obviously has a win over Lopez, which is the best win on any of these two guys' resumes. But he does it in a hard-nosed fashion. He does it in a fashion where it's a little bit easier to misinterpret or underappreciate, because he doesn't look as talented going in. But mental strength is one of the big keys at this level, and Kambosos in the Teofimo Lopez fight really showed me how mentally strong he can be. He's always been a rugged guy who comes at you and makes the fight and makes life difficult for you. But I also think that sometimes guys like that, when they run into somebody who's too talented, we've seen them break down, and then we say, oh, well, you know what, that's all they have is that mental strength, but they don't have the talent to match. Well, Kambosos is fundamentally sound. Nothing will wow you, but he's fundamentally sound. But he's in your face, and he's going to make your life very miserable, very difficult being in your face like that. And if you can't maintain your talent level, if you have a superior talent level for all 12 rounds, for all those rounds, you risk getting broken down mentally or physically, or both, to where you start to make mistakes because you don't want to deal with the stress. And this is where this fight comes into question here. It's very, very difficult to pick, because I don't think Haney has fought a legitimate lightweight who's of that level yet, and especially of the level that can take him to those places physically and mentally. We know he's talented, but the question about a very talented guy, a slickster kind of guy, is can he maintain that slickness and that talent level throughout the rounds against the guy who's going to be in his face the whole time? He's got solid wins over Diaz, Jorge Linares, guys who probably are past their primes as champion, but nonetheless were champions and they're notable names. And he won solidly against them. He had the little hiccup with Linares where he took that shot at the end of one of the late rounds, and I think if it was the middle of a round, it would have been more damaging. And I think that's the question mark here for Devin Haney, because at the end of the day, Haney's a legitimate lightweight. He's a bona fide lightweight. He's a big guy. He probably will wind up at light welterweight, in the near future. That's how physically big he is. While Linares and Jorge Diaz both were starting their careers at featherweights, as featherweights. And they were just blown up featherweights that went up to the lightweight division. In Linares' case, he actually had some success at lightweight. He won a lightweight title. But Jorge Diaz is just, an ex-world champion at a lighter weight that came up to the lightweight division. Still, this is the blueprint to bring up fighters all the time. This is the blueprint you use when you bring fighters up the ladder as prospects into contenders. I've gone into this before, guys. I mean, this is the typically blueprint you use when you're working your way to the title, not as a champion. As a champion, you're fighting other contenders. And that's why I when I was watching how Haney approached his title run, title run. I put that in quotes because I'm one of the ones that thinks, Kambosos has the legit WBC title. You can kind of tell they've still taken the same approach of a fighter that's being matured into a high level fighter who's got the talent to, but they're using him sort of like, I don't know, they used Jorge Paez against Oscar De La Hoya, for example, a faded ex-world champion, lighter weight, who comes up in weight to fight the guy, the man, the man you're trying to develop. So I sort of see Haney being molded in the same way, but as a champion. So I don't know necessarily that, the championship level caliber he has been faced in the ring yet, because he's done it the right way as far as the way you mature a fighter. But now I think this is his first legitimate test against a bona fide lightweight contender, champion. Obviously, Kambosos is a champion now. But against a guy who is going to test him will for will, skill for skill, and so on and so forth. I think what we know about Kambosos is he's willing to go to places where some guys aren't willing to go. He's willing to go and suffer for the win, and he's got no problem doing that. He's willing to get in your face, in a tough fight and stay there in that war of attrition. Make it a war of attrition. He's willing to stay there. Haney has the talent to avoid those kinds of fights, but does he have the talent to avoid those kind of fights against a bona fide lightweight, somebody his size who physically can impose on him? And that's sort of the question here. My critique is going to be the ability that Linares had to hurt him. That's my critique here. This was an ex-featherweight who was able to hurt you, at lightweight. And sometimes there's nothing wrong with that. It could be just a quick hiccup. Listen, Haney's not the easiest target to hit. And, we can say that maybe Linares' style, it was more conducive to landing a shot against Haney than Kambosos is, who's pretty much a one-speed kind of fighter. But I'll say this. Sometimes Haney reminds me of myself in my early career, and I sometimes people agree and disagree with me in this. In that, he's an athletic guy who uses his boxing ability to get by, but he's not a big puncher. But the difference with me and Haney, a couple of differences. One, I think there's more money behind him, so he's never had to be in a long-term promotional contract. He's been able to kind of move around, and because of he comes from money, he's able to kind of move his career in a little bit of a smarter way because you need money in order to do that than I was able to, but early career anyway. But nonetheless, I think he's also got that same physical style as I had, but he fancies himself as a little bit of a bigger puncher than I fancied myself as. At a certain point, I started realizing, okay, I know who I am and I know who I'm not. And it's very important to know who I'm not so that I can maximize my potential to win by making it the kind of fight I want to fight that is conducive to my strengths, which is a boxing match, a speed match. Sometimes Haney, I think, falls into, and in social media era, we kind of can fall into these criticisms where really, the issue is that, people will criticize our power and say, no, you know what, I want to maximize that. I want to show people that I can punch. And I see Haney kind of falling into this at times. I feel he throws more power than he needs to at times, and he puts himself more at risk than he needs to at times. And we saw this in the Linares fight. He could have easily breezed in the Linares fight. He's faster, he's younger, he's stronger, he's just, he's got better legs at that point. But he wanted to knock Linares out, and he just didn't have the firepower to do it, and he almost got himself knocked out in the process. Now, here's why this is a criticism. Haney is nowhere near the puncher he wants to be. He doesn't have to be that puncher to be successful, though. If he understands what he is and what he's not, he can be very successful. And the Linares situation kind of really proves it, because Linares was a guy who was not even didn't have a good chin even at featherweight. I remember even at featherweight, Linares was like a guy who was always fun to watch. You could always tell was super talented, but he'd randomly get himself knocked out. Randomly. I mean, I can remember the Juan Carlos Salgado fight. I can remember the Sergio Thompson fight, I think it was. He just randomly, you see this guy, he's in his prime, he's looking good, you're talking about him in terms of big name fights, and all of a sudden he gets put to sleep by a guy, who you would have never expected him to. So he never had a great chin, even at featherweight. So for him to be at lightweight in that kind of a fight with Haney, and Haney trying to hurt him, went as far as trying to hurt him to the point where he got himself hurt, doesn't bode well for Haney. But it could be a learning fight. It could be one of those fights where Haney now understands. Maybe that if there was a time for Haney to learn who he is and who he isn't, it's in that fight. Haney has terrific ability, but he's got to learn who he is and who he isn't, and in order to win this fight against Kambosos, because I think he can box Kambosos very well if he's able to stick to that disciplined mentality of keeping it a speed fight. Because Kambosos will try to make him change his mind a lot. He'll be dirty, he'll be rough, he'll be rugged, and if Haney invites him in to do that kind of stuff, it'll make Kambosos' life even easier. If Haney's trying to sit here trying to prove how big of a puncher he is, and it winds up in more of a firefight than he needs to against Kambosos, then he'll he'll allow an easier time for Kambosos to make the kind of fight that he wants to make. Because in my mind, Kambosos has to break Haney to the point of Haney accepting that kind of a fight. Because Haney, in my mind, should be smart enough to just make it a boxing match for as long as he can before, if he ever has to even fall into that kind of toe-to-toe fight or that kind of attrition battle. He may be able to avoid it altogether if he boxes smart enough. But I think Kambosos needs to force him into it. The only drawback here is Haney may fancy himself as a bigger puncher and willingly accept that kind of fight. You know, also the pressure of being in a foreign crowd and all that other stuff. And I don't think that bodes well for him at all. And I think the chin issues we saw against Linares could come into play here because, again, he's not faced a bona fide big, strong, bona fide lightweight or legitimate lightweight, you know, let alone a lightweight at this level. So there's a lot to think about here in this fight, and there's advantages and disadvantages for both guys, and for me, that's why it's hard to pick. It's a matter of which guy's approach is, which guy is going to take a better approach and stick with that better approach and also make the adjustments during the fight that are interesting and key in order to get that fighter ahead. Keep in mind, there could be politics here. We're going to Australia, where Kambosos is at home, and a close decision may go his way against Haney, who is coming from the United States and getting the shot. Also, let's keep in mind that Vasily Lomachenko was the one who was going to get this shot originally, but Lomachenko ended up getting occupied with the war in Ukraine and ended up having to skip out, or not having to skip out, but he chose to skip out on this opportunity. So Haney's one man's decision is another man's gain. One man's loss is another man's gain, and Devin Haney gets this opportunity to really elevate himself to another level if he's able to win this fight. So that's your pros and cons for both fighters, really. A lot of times, you know, people, anytime I criticize Devin Haney, I get told that I don't like black fighters. Anytime I criticize Canelo, I get told I don't like Mexican fighters. And anytime I criticize Pacquiao, I get told I don't like Filipino fighters or Asian fighters. And so there's racist on every side blaming me for that kind of stuff. You're all a bunch of jerk-offs, and you don't understand how to break down a fight. Because I'm going to break it down. I always break it down for you technically, and I break down the pros and cons and the possibilities of what could happen. In terms of black fighters, Floyd Mayweather is my favorite fighter in terms of me feeling who the best is. If it's not Floyd Mayweather, it's Sugar Ray Leonard. Obviously, I modeled myself in a sort of an African-American boxing style throughout my career. My sort of resume speaks for itself in that way, and my record speaks for itself in that way. But nonetheless, in this case, just the way I'm breaking down the fight, I edge Haney in terms of ability, but I don't know that if he can go there and stay with a solid disciplined game plan. The Linares fight really showed me that he might not be able to, and that's what I can only base. I can only base it off of what I've seen. Now, can I say he's learned from that fight? It's possible. It's quite possible. That was the learning experience. Sometimes that kind of moment will make you learn and you'll stay disciplined. But he's also fighting a guy who's more in his prime now in George Kambosos, a guy who's going to be more in his face in George Kambosos. Maybe not who doesn't have as much ability as Linares had in terms of speed and timing, but has the ability to getting... Security. It has the ability to stay in your face nonetheless. But having said that, I think it's a good fight. I think it's a very difficult fight to pick. I'm going to slightly edge towards Kambosos here, but I wouldn't bet on it. I don't think any of you guys should bet on it, really. I'm going with a 12-round decision. George Kambosos. Might be slightly controversial. We'll see.